All right. I know I'm kind of weird, but to me, Western philosophy kind of ends with Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard. I love him so. But there were certainly, he was writing, he died mid 1800s. So there's certainly been many philosophers since him. And it's interesting because not only did existential philosophy continue in an agnostic and even atheistic vein with people like Sartre and Camus and Nietzsche, Heidegger, and we can talk about them. I'd love to. But Marxism also continued. And even after, and this is going to be important today to understand the difference between Marxism and communism, or even socialism, for that matter. And I think I might have brought it up when I asked you to read that 19th century triad document. I don't know if you guys were able to read it. Do you remember what a dialectical materialist is? The dialectical comes from Hegel. Remember, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And so Marx simply took that and applied it to human history, where the thesis would be like the emperor, the antithesis would be the slave. And then you look for the synthesis and you just keep building until he believed it would all kind of come together in a great egalitarian wash when capitalism, was it capitalism? Oh, right. The bourgeoisie and the proletariat are united. Those that own the means of production and those that are working for a wage, the synthesis between those two is communism. At least that's how Marx saw it. Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto.
Wait, sorry, the synthesis of what two things?
The bourgeoisie, those that control the means of production, and the proletariat, the working class.
Right, okay.
And they thought the last synthesis would be communism, where everyone would share in ownership and everyone would share in the labor. You wouldn't have one class that owns stuff and the other class that work for them, but we would all be co-owners and co-laborers. And that was the dream, the utopic communist dream, where equality has come to us all. Um, After various Marxist experiments throughout the world, notably in Russia and later in China, and communism is still alive and well in both those places, although it's been mitigated. It's not pure communism or pure dialectical materialism by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, that's the distinction I wanted to make, though. Marx was presenting dialectical materialism. And what he means by that is the underlying nature of reality is physical material. There is no spiritual, there is no supernatural. And so Marxism is based on a naturalistic presupposition. Communism is simply an economic system or a social construct in which everyone shares everything in common. Okay. So that's why I would make the statement you could be a communist Christian, but you cannot be a Christian Marxist. Because communism simply means you're sharing things in common. Marxism is saying you do not believe in the supernatural. Does that make sense? Okay. And I think I might have mentioned this to you. Marx wanted to dedicate the Communist Manifesto to Charles Darwin, because Charles Darwin had done biologically what Marx and Engels were doing sociopolitically. And they were both using the same worldview or presupposition that it's only a physical material world. There is no supernatural. So what happens, though, over time, we kind of move away from that pure Marxist dialectic, his vision of communism, his materialistic view of communism, and it starts to get kind of mitigated, right? Because there is such a conflict now in the world between capitalist societies and democratic societies and communists, and what ended up pairing with them tended to be more authoritarian societies, which is curious because it didn't need to be that way, but that's the way it panned out in both China and Russia and other places where communism came to power. You ended up, rather than getting like a languid pool of equality, instead of like a capitalistic hierarchy, right, where the super rich are up here and then the top 10% and then the upper management and then the day laborers and then all the way down to the poor and people on the fringes. But in communism or Marxism, the idea is no, we're all down here in this languid pool. There is no top, there is no bottom. We're here in equality. But the reality is, most people would be down here in equality, and then you'd have a very small group way up here living the good life, like a despot. Kim Jong-un is a great example. People in his country are starving, and he's living in palaces and feastings and all of this. So that is not the ideal of what Marx was shooting for. But unfortunately, that became its outworking, at least historically. What I want to talk about today, though, isn't so much classic Marxism, but how it kind of morphed and changed names and has entered, it's become really vital in 21st century American socio-political conversations. And the way it's manifesting itself today is under what's called critical race theory. Okay, critical race theory. And this is so timely because I just saw yesterday the Southern Baptists put out they were reaffirming their doctrinal statement, and part of their doctrinal statement was critical race theory, CRT, is incompatible with the gospel and the values of the Southern Baptist Convention. And these themes, certain themes, actually, I want to pull this up. Let's see if I can read it to you. Yeah, one of my former students just posted this up, I think yesterday, maybe today. Uh-oh. Shoot. The guy's name's um, I'm collaging. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Christianity Today posted about it 2 hours ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll just see if I can remember it off the top of my head. I just wanted to not butcher it. But basically, they just went right down the list. And let me just give you a nutshell first about these sort of, it's under a broad umbrella called critical theory, but you can apply it to anything. You can apply it to religion. You can apply it to economics. You can apply it to politics. You can just, and what the idea here is, it's asking the question, who is benefiting by the way the system is currently running? Or to put it more succinctly, follow the money. Who's profiting from the way things are right now? What a great question, right? And so if you ask that question about American society, who would you say is benefiting from the status quo in America right now? You don't have to answer me, but that's what they want you to think about. Who is reaping the most rewards from the system of America?
Politicians.
Yeah, a lot of them are making quite the killing right now, aren't they?
Oh yeah.
I just cannot believe the amount of money being thrown around. Aren't we knocking on like 400 million for the runoff in Georgia right now? Just the Georgia race alone. So at least money's flowing in parts of the economy.
Yeah, it's crazy. I seen a report like for coronavirus relief, and I don't know the exact millions of dollars that came to California, but like a huge chunk, like 40-50% of that money went straight to Hollywood for advertising.
Like Corona advertising, like
Yeah,
wear a
basically.
mask,
Yeah,
keep
basically
distance,
to pay actors to uh,
do
tell people
PSAs.
to,
Yeah.
tell people to, wear your mask, stay inside, don't go to school, don't go to church, but you can go to liquor stores and strip clubs.
Okay, easy way. All right,
Sorry.
the next, the patriarchy. It's another form of oppression, and and so there's challenges to the nuclear family, or what we would call the traditional family, because once again, it's a system that keeps women um, in their place in that traditional family patriarchal role. And so, and you even saw that, right, in the Soviet Union, where there was a lot of equality granted women that Western societies weren't seeing at the same time. I mean, eventually Western societies got there, but communism just kind of like, or at least the Russian and Chinese versions, kind of leapt over, and there was a great deal of equality for women. Now, depending on how you feel about that, it meant women were out working in the fields with men, women were in the military, women were doing traditional male roles, at least in Western societies. But that was another aspect of critical theory. Who is the family benefiting? Who is it harming? That the traditional version. Um, what else? Oh, law enforcement. Why would who is law enforcement benefiting in this country? Who do the police serve? Are they serving you? Are they serving me? Or are they serving the wealthy? And so that's another great question. And so that is why when you get groups like Black Lives Matter, it becomes really confusing because there is the sentiment of Black Lives Matter. And I just think it's unfortunate, right, that it gets paired, at least in my opinion, it's unfortunate that we can't have a distinction between the Marxist version of Black Lives Matter, which there is definitely a critical race theory version of Black Lives Matter. And it's asking all, and it's pointing out white people are benefiting from the way things are, men are benefiting from the way things are. What was my third point? Law enforcement, control, taxes are benefiting the white American male. And so those are the observations and the conclusions critical race theory is observing and coming to. What do you guys think about those observations? Or do you think that's not true? Do you think the laws aren't made by powerful white men and the police aren't supporting powerful white interest, and the traditional family in America doesn't favor a white male head, and that there's equal opportunity for wealth in this country? There's no systemic racism or or attempt to keep people from the American dream. Is that true? Is it partially true? Is it all just nonsense?
I have inconclusive thoughts. I don't know. I need to do more research before I can speak authoritatively about it. And I should do research because it is important and it's being talked about a lot. And I don't, there's a lot of voices, but I would like to research and find some facts that are more backed up instead of all the opinions. Because it very well could be true. And it is true in some senses, in that, the traditional biblical structure of a family is that the man is the head, that God's the head of the church, and that the man's the head of the family. And so, because our country was built upon, some of the concepts that we've believed from the Bible, that is the general order of things, that men are, especially in previous years, men were to be the providers and women were to be the caretakers. And so that's still definitely more of the generalization, but I also don't know how many specifically laws are supportive of systemic racism or inequality between men and women. I think it may be more of a cultural phenomenon than a legal phenomenon, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's been my general understanding, and I would like to check and see if indeed there is legal inequality in addition to just some of this cultural concepts.
That's a really great distinction, Rhea, that you're making. And it's part of why this is such a conflict, because you will get people, especially in law enforcement, pointing out that we have done so much work in this country to try to remove racist, discriminatory laws or gender-based laws, right? And that is true. I mean, we have made incredible strides since the 60s, and it's just absolutely wonderful. But even though the laws have been changed, and I think you'd be really hard put to go through either local, state, or federal laws and point out, wow, that's a racist law or that's a sexist law, because a lot of that has been dealt with. But what has not changed is individuals. And I don't know that you can legislate that. Now, we can make penalties for being racist or sexist, or ableist or whatever is you want to put in there. But all that will do is drive the racism underground or deep into people's hearts, right? Because they don't want to be punished, but it's just sitting there waiting for a chance to be released. It's not fixing it. And so you'll get conservatives or law enforcement people arguing, look at the laws, show me where the systemic racism is. And then you'll have people of color and people who have felt disenfranchised or oppressed saying, would you just open your eyes and see how we're being treated? Why can't you get it? How can you not see it? And so we've got two sides both making valid claims, but they can't see. They can't see what the other people are saying. And that's a real problem. The Southern Baptist Convention tried to thread the needle. I mean, good for them, but they did make the distinction. They say Black lives absolutely matter. Absolutely. They finally apologized for their part in slavery and racism. Do you know why we have a Southern Baptist Convention? This is the value of being a history major, I guess. There was simply Baptist in America, but when the Civil War came, the Southern Baptist split from the other Baptist. So then we get American Baptist and Southern Baptist. The Southern Baptist supported secession and slavery, and the American Baptists were opposed to it. And after the Civil War, the two parts never came back together. They stayed separate all the way up until the present day. And it has been within the last 10 years that the Southern Baptist Convention finally apologized for its part in promoting slavery in this country. Just that recently. This isn't ancient history. This is like now.
Mind-blowing. Do they have different, just out of curiosity, do they have different doctrine outside of that? I'm just curious why they're still separated.
No, they would basically be both evangelicals, and so they would hold to things like the authority and inerrancy of Scripture, a triune God, and then basically like the Nicene or the Apostles' Creed. That it would be like the basics. That would be across the board with Baptists. Now, different Baptists are going to have different types of government, and some baptize forward, some backwards. I mean, but as far as the real basic core values go, they're really not that different. And so what the Southern Baptist Convention is trying to do is to affirm their care for Black people, but you're not going to find a lot of Black people in Southern Baptist churches. I mean, that's why you had African American churches making their own churches. One of the reasons is they weren't welcome or accepted in those other churches. There was segregation. In fact, I've heard it said Sunday morning is the most segregated time in America. I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds awful. It's probably true, unfortunately. And so the Southern Baptist Convention is affirming their love and care for Black Americans, but they're condemning the Marxist solution. So they're affirming Black Lives Matter as a sentiment. They're condemning it as a socio-political philosophy, which I think that's exactly right. I mean, I'm surprised I'm on the same page with the Southern Baptists on this one, but they're already getting flack from that. And I thought it was quite clear. I mean, I just read the little synopsis, but it didn't seem very confusing to me. I thought they did exactly what they needed to do: affirm God's love for all people, and especially Black people at this time because they felt so undervalued. I just spoke at this men's conference and out in the desert. I was probably the darkest one there. And
That's pretty funny.
yeah, it's really funny. And I'm just taking a break in between sessions, standing outside, looking at the beautiful desert. And this guy, he looks pretty much like me. He walks up to me and he goes, what's all this Black Lives Matter business? Last time I checked, and this is totally unsolicited, I'm just taking a break in between sessions, has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And he's just, what's with all this Black Lives Matter? And I am committed not to get in a melee with people I'm trying to minister to. And so I'm just doing self-soothing, just waiting to see where this goes. And he goes, last time I checked, Jesus died for everybody. So I think that means all lives matter. What do you think? And I wanted to say so badly, so you agree, all Black Lives Matter.
That's what I was like, oh, so he is.
But I didn't, I think the subtlety would have been lost on him. And I did not feel I had the freedom to open my mouth at that point. Whether that was the Holy Spirit or me just trying not to be belligerent, I don't know.
I'm actually curious how you dealt with that. Like, did you just genuinely say absolutely nothing, or?
I said absolutely nothing.
So how did that resolve it? Because I'm just trying to figure out how to navigate conversations that come up myself sometimes. So how did the conversation change and resolve itself?
The conversation was over. because I didn't engage it. Now, I'm sure a lot of my people of color friends would be on my business right now and be like, Blackburn, you got to call that stuff out. That's part of the problem. People like you letting people talk like that and you not confronting it. You don't have to be marching in the streets and rioting, but you got to confront it in your own backyard. But see, I don't have a relationship with those people. I was a guest speaker. They didn't know me from Adam. I have no authority in their life. There's no reason they should listen to me. Besides, I was invited to speak to them. And
Yeah.
so to me, I have to have a relationship before I engage people at that level. Even with people I have really close relationships with, I've gotten to a point where I can't have those conversations anymore. Now, I have confronted, I've tried, but the resistance continues, and I realize I cannot force a change of perspective or heart. And so I just have to not discuss it with them anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the right way to handle it. That's just where I am
Yeah.
at the moment. Same conference, next break. I'm standing out back, and this guy asked me, he goes, did the Craigs help you out for coming to teach us? And I said, not yet, but they usually take care of me. And he goes, well, he just whips out his wallet and he just starts throwing out 20s to me. And he goes, well, I want to help you out. And I was like, no, it will be fine. I appreciate it. He goes, I can afford it. I said, okay, man, if you can afford it, I am a vessel in need. Fill me up. So it was sweet. He gave me $60, and the Craigs did come through and help me, but I was able to save them some money because I subtracted what that guy gave me. And after he had given me the money, he said, you know, my family owned a plantation in the South, and they owned slaves and all, but I'm sure they were the good slave owners, not those bad slave owners. And I'm just sitting there going, what is going on? Do I have like a big BLM over my forehead or something? I mean, what kind of vibe am I giving off that is like soliciting these conversations? And once again, it had nothing to do, I was talking from my book, The Dead Have No Need of Ethics. It had nothing to do with socio-political movements or race inequality or any of that. All right. So anyways, back to critical race theory. I actually really appreciate the questions, and I think they're really helpful. I mean, we could do it at our school. You simply ask the question, who is benefiting from the way the school is organized? Okay. That would be a critical race application right where we live and go to school and learn or teach or work or whatever.
I have a question. Where did the title come from? Critical race theory. Is it because we're talking?
Critical theory is the big umbrella,
Okay.
and then you can apply it to race, economics, religion, anything.
Okay. So if we're applying it to in context of our school and looking at it outside of just specifically what race does benefit, we maybe use a different.
You could call it critical organizational theory or something like that.
Interesting. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I love the questions. I even think Marx really cared about people. He cared about the working class. He felt like humans were being turned into objects. They were being objectified by the people that controlled the means of production, the people that controlled the capital and the factories and the resources. And humans were being used just like cogs that they would plug in until they wore them out or injured them. They'd pull them out, replace them with a fresh one. And when you think of like the Industrial Revolution in England and other places, people came in droves from the country to work in these factories where literally 10, 12 hours a day, all they might be doing is changing out spools of thread. That's it. And you can imagine like how dangerous those factories would have been, before regulations and all of those things. Fortunately for England, they hit the Industrial Revolution so much quicker than a lot of their European contemporaries that they had a time to actually develop safeguards for their workers, to put regulations on capitalism. So it wasn't just a free for all. And making safety standards, making child labor laws, making protections for women, even prison reform, and even abolitionist movements going on in England. Over 100 years before it happened in the United States. Amazing. And it was all done without a civil war or all of that. And C.K. Chesterton had a lot to do with that, the famous preacher of confronting and challenging. And anyways, other places like Germany and especially Russia, which was like the last major European power to industrialize, to go from like a feudal to an industrial society. And it was too late for them. There was no time. And you had a very small percentage of the nobility and the church, just like in France, right? That the nobility and the church, and then you had the vast majority of humanity below them. And in Russia, they were serfs and peasants. They had very little value, certainly no political power, no rights. And so when the Bolshevik Revolution happened and Lenin brought ideological Marxism to Russia, there was such an overwhelming response to it because there were so many people disenfranchised. Same thing happened in this country, but it was done more in the form of like unions, trade unions. But if you follow the history of unions in this country, a lot of Americans just thought they were communist. And there was a lot of pressure and resistance towards organized labor. And a lot of it was out of fear of what would happen. But because we did allow unions, it probably helped prevent a full-on Marxist revolution. But now things are changing, right? Now we have people like Bernie and others that are just full-blown. You never heard American, at least no one taken seriously, talk like that. And now not only are people talking about democratic socialism, and the difference between democratic socialism and communism, ideological communism would be everyone shares everything in common. Marx's little mantra was beautiful. Each gives according to their ability, and each receives according to their need. How lovely is that sentiment, right? I mean, beautiful. You give what you can, you receive what you need. I mean, what a wonderful world that would be. But in democratic socialism, it's the state that controls things, not individuals. And then it's the state that is meant to provide equality across the board. Where in communism, it would be down to the individual level. But how do you run a government or a society if everyone is equal and shares everything in common? So the democratic socialism at least still gives you the governmental bureaucracy and apparatus that then they can distribute the goods to the individuals. And then you have like National Socialism, which is what the Nazis were, where the Nazi Party controlled the state, they controlled the resources, they controlled the means of production, and ipso facto controlled the people. And that, of course, is the great fear of many Americans is, if the government controls everything, won't that jeopardize our individual rights and freedoms? Because it is the collective, right? It's that collective mind, like the Borg. It's like add your distinctives to the collective that we may all prosper together, as opposed to like that Kierkegaardian existential individualism that is like, no, everyone needs to stand or fall on their own merits. It's we shouldn't be looking for handouts, and people shouldn't be expecting us to pull them out of their bad choices and decisions. Okay. And so, I mean, that's a gross caricature, but I'm being a little extreme to make the points. Obviously, there's tons of nuanced gradations in between, but I just think it's super pertinent. And I really had kind of dismissed Marxism after the collapse of the Soviet Union and all of that. And I really didn't think about it so much until probably 5 years ago when the whole Black Lives Movement started, at least when I became aware of it. It might have been going longer. Um, one of my former students who's in a graduate program kind of he did it really gently because I wanted to share in that sentiment of Black Lives Matter. They matter very much to me, but um, he explained to me the critical theory, the critical race theory connection, which I was oblivious to. And then once I researched and understood that, I could understand. But I would dare say, of the tens of thousands of people that protested in the streets this year for Black Lives Matter, I would be stunned if more than 5% had any clue about critical race theory or Marxism or communism or anything like that. They're probably much more reacting to the personal trauma and offenses that they have experienced in their life. They're not thinking the solution is Marxism or communism or something like that.
I think there may be a decent amount of people that have, they don't necessarily know the critical race theory lingo, but that has been something. Those questions are questions that are being asked, like very visibly and often. Who is this benefiting? The concept of the patriarchy and the fact that white people are privileged, specifically white men privileged. These are concepts that are very frequently spoken of. So I think people have a general concept of that bit, but I don't think that the very large majority of them had any concept that was tied to like Marxism.
Right.
A few do.
I mean,
But
it's a catchy slogan.
Yeah, it is. Because it's important. It's true. That's the bit that makes me a little frustrated because I would never stand against that statement. That statement is 110% true. And anybody who thinks otherwise is it's very wrong.
Right. But the retort is going to be, oh, Rhea, you've bought into the Marxist lie.
Right.
Wake up, young woman.
That's the trouble. It stands for a community of people who have really untraditionally American concepts that I don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard. It's a weird.
It is hard.
But
see, that's the other thing that riles conservatives so much, because part of those other values might be non-traditional marriages, same-sex marriages, transgender rights, LGBTQ awareness and accommodation, not to mention gender equality, racial equality, social stratification mitigation. I mean, all. Oh, that's kind of catchy. That would be a good T-shirt. Um, so yeah, I love it. I love the care and concern for the outcast, the oppressed. I mean, to me, that's just screams the gospel. But it's not a gospel solution. It's a Marxist solution. It's a Leninist solution, which is the people that own the means of production, the people that have the big piece of pie, are not going to share it with you of their own free will. It's not going to happen. I mean, you might get the rare philanthropists, but for the most part, not only do they want to keep their big piece of pie, but they want to even make it bigger. And we see that happening with the incredible wealth and equality happening in America. In my anthropology class a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago now, I just saw an article that listed the top 50 people, the top 50 wealthiest people in the United States have as much economic value, and that's in land, stocks, bonds, cash, all that stuff, as the bottom 153 million Americans. 50 people have the same wealth as 150 Americans combined. And that's just, I can't even wrap my head around what that means or how that's even possible or equitable. And you wonder why there's not violent, bloody revolution in the street later this afternoon. But I think part of it is because even the bottom 10% in this country are still significantly better off than many people around the world, where, yeah, they may not have a home, they may even be on the street, but they're still eating, there's still resources, um, there's still medical care. It's not just a complete abandonment and disregard, even among the least of our society, or what would be considered the lowest rungs of our society. And but I think there's a tipping point, and you can follow this through history. You can only have wealth inequality go for so long until the people down here are just like, why are we letting such a small group up here control the vast majority of us down here? And once that realization happens, bad things happen to these people up here usually. But the wealthy, I'm sure, are aware of that. And they have to navigate carefully if they want to maintain their wealth and privilege, but not to so agitate the people down here that they end up with pitchforks and torches at their mansion gates, right? Because that would be kind of counterproductive.
I think the most interesting thing to me is that, how do I say this? Like, in this frustration where people who recognize the gap, right? They'll, they'll say phrases like, eat the rich, whatever they're saying, where they're upset at the inequality, but then they turn to the government to fix it, which is essentially a whole nother collective group of wealthy people who are controlling their lives more than your average wealthy person. The average wealthy people are
the
wealthy.
The difference is you get to vote for those people. That's the democratic part.
It's true. That is true.
Unlike the wealthy,
that is interesting.
Like, I didn't vote Bezos
I'd be curious
to be the wealthiest man in the world. Although every time you buy my book, he gets half the money.
Half?
Brilliant. Okay, 40%, but still.
That's a lot. I did not know that.
And that's times that by everyone who's selling stuff on Amazon. And you just see why his wealth is just like, yeah. And this whole COVID thing has just been like a godsend for that type of business or retailer. Yeah, I don't begrudge him or anything. I think it's a quite brilliant model. I think it would be great if maybe we could get some more competition in there. And once again, Congress is most likely going to do that. I mean, they did it with the railroads, they did it with the steel companies. As different technologies come in and certain monopolies or controls come in, that is when our government puts checks. But that's because we have regulated capitalism in America. We do not have free market capitalism or laissez-faire capitalism, which is French for hands off. The government just says, survival of the fittest, baby. If you've got a better product, a better work model, you're going to run your competitors into the ground, and that's better for everyone because it's a better product at a cheaper price. That's the classic line. Yeah. And there is truth to that to a degree. But if you get people so powerful, and let me pick on Walmart for a second, when they come into a community, yeah, they can undercut everybody because they're selling at such volume that before too long, your local hardware store might go out, your local bakery, your local grocery, your whatever, because they cannot compete with that massive wholesale that these mega box stores can do. But it's convenient, right? How convenient to one-stop shop. and not have to go all over town because you want a hammer and a cantaloupe and a new pen or some lawn furniture. I mean, you could do all of that at Walmart or Target or Costco or wherever. And so it's super interesting. But the government, you can see, right, all the hearings, they have questions, especially about big tech. And it's not just left or right, it's both. Democrats and Republicans are like, what are you guys doing? Is that enough about critical theory? I just want to make sure you guys knew what it was, why there's a conflict. And I love the questions. I think they're very humane. I think they're very insightful. And I think they can point you to where potential problems or oppression is. My personal opinion, however, because I am a Christian and I do believe in a supernatural as well as a physical reality, I do care about people's day-to-day earthly lives. But for me, the real solution is a conversion of the heart. Not changing the laws, although I'm not opposed to changing unjust laws. But like I said, from my white male privileged perspective, I think a lot of the legal work has been done. What has not caught up is the hearts of people. But racism, I really believe it's taught. And it keeps getting taught generationally. And somehow we got to break that chain of that sort of thing. And I think one of the best ways to break it is to actually get to know people that don't look like you, don't come from where you came from, don't think like you, don't believe like you. And the more you begin to engage the other, it can help broaden your perspective and realize. And it doesn't mean that you're just accepting and believing what all these other different groups or people or positions believe, but it's at least helping you get out of this little bubble space and see that, wow, other people see things differently than me. I wonder why that is. What could lead to that vast difference in perspective? Because it seems like we're talking about the same thing or looking at the same thing, but they see it 180 degrees differently than I see it. How is that possible? And is there a way we can come together somehow? All right. Holy cow, that went fast. Did I tell you guys about Wittgenstein and his caveman language yet? I can't remember if I did.
I don't believe so.
Okay. I think unless you guys want to meet again, I'm happy to meet again. It's your dime or your grand or $3,000. But I'm happy to just give you next week to finish up any makeup work or your term paper. And we don't have to Zoom next week unless you want to. Is that good?
Either works. I love these conversations. I would not mind at all meeting more.
Well, I'm happy to meet. Yeah,
It's fine either way.
All right. Well, I'll plan on meeting, and maybe we can open it up to topics, and I can just be a resource for you. So let me just end with Wittgenstein. He is actually a 20th century philosopher, German philosopher, came to the United States, brilliant linguist. Noam Chomsky, he might be the greatest intellectual or living philosopher in America today. The first time I came into awareness of him was a film he made called The Manufacture of Consent. Wow. Changed my view of the press and media forever. And,
baby.
And,
Gold.
Are you actually?
Yeah.
So in this book, or in this video documentary called The Manufacture of Consent, he says, it isn't that the media, I mean, he would probably have a field day today. This was made like 30 years ago. And maybe 40 years ago he made this. So this isn't just some new phenomena. This is like classic American media and press. And he said it's not so much, and he's talking 30, 40 years ago, that the media is telling you outright lies. It's more what they aren't telling you. It's like he compared it almost like the eye of Sauron, that whatever it gazed upon, you would just have all this intensity. And I really started to become aware of that as the press would move around the world from crises to crises or headline story to headline story. They would linger there until the next thing happened. Like, do you think there's no conflict happening in Honduras and Nicaragua and San Salvador right now? I mean, give me a break. But that's not where the media is focused. So we don't even think about it. We don't. But if we weren't in the middle of an election year or a pandemic or any of that stuff, the press would be looking for something to focus on and to obsessive compulse over until they just wore themselves and us out. And then they would turn all that energy to something else. And as an example, he picked some conflict like I don't know, 40 years ago, maybe it was like the Arab Israeli conflict or something. And he had almost like one of those cashier receipt rolls, and he rolled it out and it probably traveled 100 yards. And he goes, this is how much news coverage is on the Palestinian Israeli conflict. And then he pointed out another conflict in East Timor. Have any of you even heard of East Timor? Oh, good for you, Wayne. What do you know about East Timor?
I don't know a lot about it, but I think there's like a previous conflict with China.
China might have been involved as a provider of, well, no, actually, we were providing weapons, so never mind. Timor is an island in Indonesia, and it is divided in half. Half the island is Muslim, and half Eastern Timor is Christian. And Indonesia is a Muslim country. And they have systematically been trying to genocide the Christian half of the island, physically remove them from this earth.
Okay,
And
this something different, but yes, I have heard
the
about this.
US was supplying weapons to the Indonesian government against this minority population. And he took out, once again, a roll of like receipt thing, and he went to like he was going to roll it out to show how much coverage there was. And this is like international papers around the world. How much had people been made aware of this conflict? And there was like this much. And it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, right? Out of knowledge, out of care or concern. And that was really helpful to me as a young man in evaluating news sources and trying not to let myself get worked up in whatever frenzy the press was like chumming, right? The press is like chumming the water. And it's so much worse now with cable news and the major cable networks, especially when you're just hearing the pundits or the commentators. And once again, I'm not blaming one side or the other. I think it's equal. And I'm not doing percentages or anything, but I think both sides are doing it. And I think I find it really unhelpful. And I don't think it brings us together. Anyways, Wittgenstein, in pursuing with Noam Chomsky, came up with this idea of universal grammar. And what he said was John Locke was wrong with this idea of a tabula rasa. You are not born with a blank slate. You are born with the capacity for language. And even if you don't have someone to teach you a language, you will make up your own because that is part of being hardwired as a human being. And it's true, like they found feral children or they found people raised by wolves, those sorts of stories, and they had a language because you have to have a language to think and to interact with the world, even if it's your own. And I just thought, wow, that's so brilliant. But Wittgenstein took that and other teachings and he said, the problem with language is it's symbolic. And when I say a word like tree, I guarantee you what I mean when I say the word tree is not what you mean when you say the word tree.
That's insane. I didn't even think of how objective language is.
It's not.
I mean subjective. How unobjective. That's mind-blowing.
Yes. Because we've all had different experiences. We've all had different encounters. We all have different contexts of where we even learn that word, that symbolic sound that represents something in the physical material world. And because of that, Wittgenstein said, because words mean such different things to all of us, that when I'm like what I am trying to communicate to you right now is not what you are hearing. Because as soon as these vibrational frequencies go from my mind, my thoughts, I form symbolic sounds with my mouth that pass through the speaker on my computer. They travel through the air, they're digitized, reassembled, come out in sounds on your computer, hit your ear. By the time it leaves my lips and gets to your ear, what I said is not what's going in the other side. Even if you were standing next to me live, it's not going to be the same. Because once it comes into your ear, then it has to be interpreted by your mind, your experiences, your knowledge, yada, 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 yada. And so Wittgenstein came to the conclusion that we do not have the language to even do philosophy. Because philosophy is a lot like the press, where like the eye of Sauron, it can turn its gaze on anything. Politics, religion, origins, ethics, beauty, any of that. But what happened with Wittgenstein is he turned the eye of philosophy upon itself. And it kind of like self-paralyzed philosophy, because now it's caught in this language loop it can't get out of. And in a lot of ways, you could say Wittgenstein was the end of philosophy, or that he loops us all the way back to the beginning again. Because what he said is language, and I know we're past time, but I'm just strapped. Oh, no, I got 2 minutes. Perfect. He said, say I'm trying to describe this coffee. What do I got here? Oh, I got Columbia Supremo today. Slumming it. Anyways, so I got my coffee, and I could talk about. Okay, so it's kind of got a high, almost like sour yet slightly fruity, sweet upper tones, but then it has these really nice dark, almost chocolatey undertones. So that creates a nice balance between the high end and the low end. And yeah, it's not quite full bodied, but it's not watery either. It's kind of that nice medium. And that's what Columbia Supremo is. It's just kind of that nice medium. It's not the super dark. It's not the super light. But that's a really enjoyable cup of coffee. Okay, you heard all that nonsense. Now let me describe it directly. Mm. 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 See the difference? Which communicated more information to you? Wittgenstein would say, all those flowery, colorful words and descriptions, it just is confusing us further and further from the objective reality of whatever's in this cup. because now I'm doing all this embellishment and all those different things mean different things to me than they mean to you. You may not even like chocolate. You may not like tart. And all of that stuff is going in. But if I just go, that's pretty unmistakable. Yum pleasure sounds. And Wittgenstein's just saying, we got to get back to primal communication if we really want to communicate with people, like cavemen, like fire, good.
Come to find out, it was just water in the cup. Right?
No, that was actually Columbia.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, it could be, right?
Yeah. What got me was when you were talking about the tree, and when you say tree, I'm sitting here like visualizing this aspen tree in Colorado with the golden leaves in the middle of fall. I doubt that it was exactly what you were saying.
Nope, it was not. And now, I'm not saying, Wittgenstein's a philosopher, right? He's trying to go for these absolute universal essential truths or concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand what he's saying, and I do agree with it fundamentally, but I also believe we do seem to be able to communicate a great deal. Maybe it's not exactly, but I think that's part of the art of learning how to communicate, is to be aware of your audience, to be aware of the language you're using. Don't use vocabulary that they don't understand. Speak in their own native tongue. Speak at their level. If you're speaking to children, it's going to be different than college students. Have you ever had a teacher teach you like you were 5 in college? It's quite disturbing. I think that's when you're starting to get old as a teacher, when you start referring to the college students as kids. As your kids.
I mean, I refer to us as kids collectively, so it also depends.
Because I certainly don't look at you all as kids,
Right.
but it's like it's a relative thing to me. Like, compared to how old I am, many of you are like kids to me. Not you, Wayne, but most of the rest of you.
Yeah.
So would that be critical age theory?
You could totally apply it to
Gotcha.
And like ageism, right? Who benefits from the way Americans age in our society? Medical, pharmaceutical, insurance. Those are just right off the top of my head out the chute.
Education.
And that's a huge thing right now. It's not just about race and gender and sex or sexual orientation. It's also about ableism and ageism. They're right in there.
Yeah.
And I'm not forgetting it. Because you can see, once again, follow the money. How are old people being treated in your organization? Are they revered? Are they honored? Are they expendable? Do they cost too much to maintain? Because a professor at my end of the spectrum could cost up to twice as much as an entry-level professor. Theoretically, that's not the reality at our school, but theoretically, that's how it normally works. And so if some CFO is trying to cut cost, well, you could get rid of a couple old timers and bring in 4 younger faculty.
Interesting.
Yes, fascinating. But see, if they do it because you're old, you could fight them legally.
Huh.
But if they just do it without a reason or explanation, like we're moving in a different direction.
Uh-huh.
I mean, how are you going to make a legal case? You would have to prove or demonstrate they were discriminating you because of age, because of ability, because of sexual orientation, because of gender, because of race. And
No.
that's difficult to do unless you have a complete bonehead administrator or human resource person who isn't thinking about what they're saying. But usually they're quite adept at navigating terminations.
I got to get going.
Okay. It's
Thank you
good
so
having you.
much.
I will go ahead and have a class Tuesday,
Sure.
and
Cool.
so I'll plan a Zoom meeting there,
Sounds good.
and then we
All
can
right.
decide then if you want to meet again on Thursday or be done.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
You.
So fun.
Yes.